Very nice. Thank you so much. I think right now my biggest worry is my speech is going to blow away. So I just hope that you bear with me. Give me a minute. Okay. First of all, I would like to thank you for asking me to present this speech today. Though Lyons, Decatur, Northeast, or Lyons, Decatur is not my hometown, for the last 15 plus years, has become a community who seems to have adopted me as their own. And this time my speech is a bit personal to me, and I wouldn't want to share it with any other group than you guys. I dedicate this to Dr. John Milligan, my great uncle, who gave the biggest and strongest bear hugs of mankind. Today, I hope you don't mind, but I would like to share a story with you about a man who meant a lot to me as a child growing up in a country where I felt I could be anything. He was the beginning of my understanding of patriotism, and after taking time to have conversations with my dad, my 96-year-old great aunt, who has the humor and wit of an 18-year-old, and my Uncle Bob, and even a little digging around on the internet, I had no idea what journey this speech would lead me on, and I don't think it's going to end here. You see, I remember my great Uncle John, who I referred to as Dr. John, as one of the cutest older men I ever knew. And that's kind of hard to beat over here because you guys are pretty adorable. Every meeting we had with one another began with a big smile, his arms outstretched for a hug. And I'm not going to lie, his hugs absolutely terrified me. He would bring me in, hold me close, and squeeze me so tight I was just sure he would break some bones. When he released, it was always a relief to get that intimate moment out of the way. After my sisters and cousins would do our cordial hellos with the adults, we'd run down to Dr. John's basement and pretend to be adults ourselves. We'd play billiards, pretend to play bartender, with ginger ale and tonic, of course, or making it through a ping pong tournament. But we'd always take time to gaze over the pictures, medals, jacket, and helmet of Dr. John's days in World War II. I'm sure there were at certain points he would stop to tell us a story or two, but our youth would quickly move on to a game of croquet outside where our parents could keep a better eye on us. As I got older, I remember visiting my Dr. John and my Aunt Joan when they moved to Arizona in their retirement years. One evening, we sat back on their patio with the guest and his wife as they invited over for dinner. I remember Dr. John introduced his friend to me and boasted, "Katie, this man here was one of the toughest fighter pilots you'll ever meet. You have no idea what he did to protect our country. He was fearless." I'm sure my reaction was quiet, unsure of what to say or how to react, and I'm sure he did something super cool like, "Awesome." I cannot tell you how many times I wish I could go back to that moment. Knowing and understanding what I know today makes me so frustrated with my younger self. Why didn't I thank him? Why didn't I ask him questions? Why didn't I say, "Dr. John, tell me more"? I don't know. As I witnessed some of my students around the veterans at Veterans Day, I observed their same reaction. Perhaps at that age, it's just too much for us to understand. We are still learning what it means to live in this country, and now more than ever, it can be really confusing. But today, with a few anecdotes on my great Uncle John, I hope to make it clearer for you. In fact, I hope I can make what it means to be a citizen of this great country crystal clear. There is always one story that sticks out to me that my great Uncle John shared. It wasn't a war story. I'm not going to lie, I don't think he shared too many of those stories with me. A bit traumatizing for a young girl, I'm sure. But he did have one story of when he was going through medical school at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln. He and my grandfather were also part of the Alpha Tau Omega fraternity. It was in the midst of the Great Depression, and here you had a family that had not one, but two boys attending school. Both had to work two jobs on top of their degrees, one at a diner, various jobs around the fraternity. And as I discussed the story with my family members, no one could quite remember, but I know he told me there came a point where it had become just too much. Everything was just too expensive, and it was time for him to quit. One of his fraternity brothers could not stand the idea of John quitting the fraternity, let alone medical school. So he got his father involved, and he met with John and later wrote him a check. I can't tell you how much this check was for, but it was enough to keep John with his brotherhood and enough to keep him pedaling away at becoming a doctor. This story always stuck with me. I couldn't quite believe that someone would do this. I mean, for all this father knew, John would spend the money on lavish items or flunk out of college in the meantime. But he didn't. John got his medical degree and decided to use it to better serve his country. In fact, he ended up with one of the most notorious squadrons in World War II history. He was about 30 years old when he signed on to be a flight surgeon for the 510th Fighter Squadron. His first emergency was in the States when a pilot by the name of Colonel Arlie J. Blood survived a crash landing over the top of the Florida swamps. A tree caught his parachute, saving his life from his plane, a P-47 Thunderbird, that was smoldering just 20 feet below him. Up came an ambulance through the mud and the marsh where he was rescued from the tree and thrown in the back of the vehicle. My great-uncle leaned over Blood's gurney, checking his vital signs, both surgeon and pilot bouncing up and down as they rode along the muddy path back to base. John handed Blood a shot of whiskey and said, "Take this, it'll calm you down." For Blood replied, "I don't think I need it." To which my great-uncle replied, "Well, I do." And he downed the shot himself. Though the initial meeting between Colonel Blood and John started off with some humor, it also came with some seriousness, for John was also the one who had to break it to Blood that his wingman had not survived. As a side note, Blood continued to be one of the most needed pilots in the 510 Fighter Squadron. Once they began to attack Germany, he was known for flying his P-47 fearlessly through the air and taking out trains carrying German supplies, but would later disappear for almost a year. For his plane crashed, he survived it, found the French underground resistance, lived with them for a while. Later, the Nazis found them. Then he became a prisoner of war, escaped it, found his French friends, and found his way back eventually to the United States to live a long life. He is also the author of the book, Only Angels Have Wings, which tells of his time of a prisoner of war. Back to my John, now referred to as Doc Milligan by all the gentlemen on the base. It was said he did not necessarily fit the mold of a typical flight surgeon. A gentleman by the name of Charlie Morrill called Doc the soul of our squadron, our friend, our MD, our confidant, our confessor, our psychologist. Doc Milligan had a way of recognizing when any of his men were having an especially hard time, cracking under the pressure and stress of being a fighter pilot, or if they started to sink into a darker place, dwelling on the losses or worrying they would fail to measure up. For those from time to time needing coping with the day-to-day dangers of combat training and later combat duty, Doc was the glue that held the 510th Squadron together into an effective fighting force and a brotherhood. From organizing inter-squadron softball games on base to serenading the men with his skillful renditions of Danny Boy. And I do know he was a singer because with every single family gathering, we always sang, but his favorite song that he'd love to sing to me was, "Katie, beautiful Katie, you're the only one that I adore. When the moon shines over the cowshed, I'll be waiting at the kitchen door." And he was also known for mixing cocktails during the squadron parties, which I'll get into in a little bit. My great-uncle's version of protecting and maintaining the physical and mental health of his men went beyond what any of the officers had experienced in the Army before meeting him. My great-aunt Joan said he was the father figure to these boys. He was 30, they were in their late teens, early 20s, and for this first time in their lives away from home, away from their country, and then given the duty to protect their country. He was their rock. He was a major part of keeping their social life uplifted in the hardest of times. After losing two of their top pilots, one who'd perished and the other one was Blood, who became prisoner of war, the men decided one weekend it's still important to keep our spirits high. So during the party, Doc made his famous cocktail, for which he mixed 150 proof grain alcohol with grapefruit juice in an unused P-47 gas tank. It was also known as Kickapoo Joy Juice. I wonder if Poppin' Doc serves that still. When later stationed in France, he would often take the ambulance to town. When he would return, the young pilots would surround the vehicle, knowing that Doc had brought back an ambulance full of French champagne. When the boys would have a little too much fun, they would come to John for proper oxygen before spending their day up in the P-47. Perhaps these stories don't seem extremely heroic. However, this particular squadron's camaraderie allowed them to successfully coordinate and execute air support of ground forces that go beyond our imagination. In fact, it was their tactical accomplishments that changed General Patton's opinions of fighter pilots in the United States military. The 510 Squadron wasn't about dropping bombs to create large amounts of German civilian casualties. Instead, they worked on destroying roads, bridges, and railroads with P-47s. When General Patton's men worked on the ground, they were able to bulldoze these off the road and claim it to move forward in the war. As amazing as it was for my great uncle to look after these fearless boys as a father, it came with some extreme heartaches as well. So many times they wouldn't return. About a year after being in the war, the men were ready to pull out of their station in France and try to move closer to the German territory. One of the pilot's plane's wings clipped an electrical line, causing it to flip and kill him immediately. The French town nearby, the citizens found his body, wrapped him up in the American flag, and they buried him. When it was safe for my great uncle John to return, he finally returned to the burial site. He personally dug up the body and brought him back to the 510 Squadron and made sure that the pilot was buried in the United States Cemetery in Nuremberg, Germany. I could go on and on about my great uncle John, Dr. John, Doc Milligan, but I can't help but go back to that story when a fraternity brother's father wrote a check. Did he know that it was at that moment that gracious sentiment would turn into the glue that kept the 510th Fighter Squadron together? Today, let us remember those who died fearlessly within our patriotic hearts. But let us also remember those who believe and continue to believe in our country. Like me, you may never join the military, fly a P-47, or become a flight surgeon. But this country is about the great citizens who give any way they can. Always be that citizen who is willing to give within your means. You never know. You just may be the man or the woman who provides a future for one of the best flight surgeons who helps protect your way of life. Don't ever be fooled at what impact you can make on this country. And with that, I conclude. God bless America.